Yo, what's going on, Tank Clan? It is your boy King Next here, back with another video, and this video is going to be what if Issei was Malim's reincarnation. Um, Shout out to Neptune because of the fact that they helped me with the planning of this, and you should definitely check out their channel as well because of the fact that they make pretty interesting content. Although it's like Data Live XDXD so far, they do plan on expanding their content as soon as they actually get everything in order. So like if you guys are interested, you can end up like joining the server, talk to them about like any plans that you may have or anything that you may be interested in seeing in their story, or just be able to talk to me in general on my Discord server. I will leave the link to the server in the description below. Now to roll that intro.
In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm facing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep a trail in the ville, how I go by. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kick out a kick back and hit like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm
Milim, from an onlooker, would have just been seen as any other regular girl. Sure, she had pink hair and dressed pretty odd for someone that seemed to have the physical appearance of a teenager, but that was the only thing people could probably tell that was odd about her. That was until you actually got to know the girl and realize who she really was. Her name was Maleen, sure, but she also went by two other names. Those names being the Tyrant of the Destruction and the other simply being Destroyer. Her name was feared all across the lands. Even speaking of her name would cause the others to shudder. The nervousness they would feel whenever anyone spoke of her name could cause people to suffer from panic attacks. But no one would believe she was a pretty nice girl for the most part, who just liked to fight others so long as you never crossed her. She had a sweet and innocent side to her. She was practically immortal too. Unfortunately, most of Malim's companions weren't immortal like her. Some of her closest friends ended up dying from old age after all. She had tried reviving people in the past, but it never ended up well. Maleen decided enough was enough though, after she had to bury another one of her compatriots after they lost the fight against time. She didn't want to live in this body anymore. She wanted to be with her friends again. She was willing to journey into the great unknown and sacrifice herself in order to go through such a journey. The world went dark for her, but a bright light ended up appearing. She saw something completely different now. What world was she in? Did the plan work? Many questions were going through her head until she heard someone call out the name Issei. She was confused as to who was calling out said name. Better yet, who was this Issei? She tried looking around, but she could only see in one direction. Not a moment later, someone ended up walking into the room and they began to stretch out their arms. Milim had no idea what was going on, but she ended up hearing a gruff voice right after. They laid next to Milim, and she was even more surprised to see a large red dragon. Where was she? Before she could start asking questions though, the seemingly full-blooded dragon began to speak, explaining her predicament. It appeared that the soul of the mighty dragon, Drake, wasn't the only one placed within the boy's body. Maleen began to connect the dots after Drake informed her of this, and facepalmed. She really ended up getting reincarnated into a baby's body. Well, wasn't that great? She supposed it would be good to get the attention of the boy as soon as possible. For all she knew, they could probably begin to influence the boy's actions from early on so he could develop into something even Milim would approve about. Drake couldn't be bothered though. If she found some progress, he would eventually join in as well, but he was playing the waiting game for now. It took a couple of years, but Maleen managed to actually get through to her reincarnate, although she was pretty much only really able to get through to him via dreams. That little bit of influence was enough to push Issei, though, since he began to form an interest in fighting others, especially really strong people. He seemed to crave action and could almost never be satisfied if he didn't get at least one fight in a day. He was always itching to fight others, and his parents couldn't explain why. Issei also seemed to really like the color pink and asked his parents a few times for some pink hair dye. They almost always refused though. By the time Issei was around 9 years old, he finally began to really develop some of his abilities that he inherited from Milim, such as never seemingly being tired in a fight. He was always at 100% capacity for some reason. Not even the doctors could explain it, since even symptoms like ADHD didn't necessarily give him the immunity to lethargy. Issei also seemed to gain some sort of skeletal strength in his eye as well, which helped him single out the strongest kids in his school, even if they didn't look like much sometimes. Issei could even tell when the kids were going full force or easy on him. Those who went easy on him, he would end up showing why it would be a bad idea to do so in the future. Issei would gain a reputation throughout the years for his horrible behavior as well. He was looked at as a tyrant of destruction. Over the years, Issei would begin to show more of a brash and headstrong sort of personality. He was reckless, but his strength and speed made up for it. He was a brawler and a delinquent. His parents honestly didn't know where they went wrong. They would have never guessed it was because of the influence of a demon lord. Not only that, but Issei's delinquency began to spread to whichever school he was part of. Issei had gone through his middle school years literally just beating up most of his opponents. He somehow managed to form his own sort of empire within his first year there. Issei was practically hunted down by the school staff on a daily basis, but his loyal followers always ended up covering for him. Issei, Destroyer Hyodo, was nothing short of influential and dangerous. Several schools didn't want to deal with him in fear of them becoming another one of Issei's cults, but Kuo Academy, interestingly enough, made the biggest mistake in history by accepting Issei. In their minds, they figured that all of Issei's actions were exaggerated and that they could reform him into a model student. They were wrong. 1 week. That's all it took for Issei to get into some conflict with some of the student body. It was mainly with the guys though. Issei took down the biggest guy at the school who tried to make fun of him for dyeing the tips of his hair pink. He said it was girly, but Issei went on to show what was really girly. He kicked their teeth in and went on to slam their head into one of the lockers, immediately knocking them out. Issei caused panic when everything was still new. Issei dodged several attacks from others who wanted to try and take their chance with him. After all, Issei was only around 5'5", while these guys were around 5'9" to 6 foot. They figured that their big guy was just weak and Issei beating them was just a fluke. Issei, before their third period, already stacked up a mountain of beaten up bodies. They were forced to kneel to him and pledge their allegiance to him from there on. No one wanted to mess with Issei. He was an oddball, that was for sure. Rias, Grummery, and Sona Citri realized that was honestly for sure. Sona didn't want him since he seemed like an extremely unruly child in her eyes. Rias wanted to know more about this kid though. He gave off a different aura from the others. They were stronger than the average human, that was for sure, but it was as if his soul was infused with two others. What was that about? Rias was even more shocked to see Sona Citri herself at Issei's feet. That was unprecedented. She would never bow her head to anyone, so why Issei? Why the new kid that was also a delinquent? It didn't make much sense in Rias's eyes. She ended up stepping in the way to defend her friend and pick the black-haired girl up. Rias couldn't believe Sona had been beaten up so badly. She wanted to know how it all started, but Sona refused to spill the beans for some reason. Sona went on to inform her sister about the events though. Something she mentioned that seemed peculiar was the whole issue of Issei having a sacred gear. Not just any sacred gear either. It appeared that Issei was a new Red Dragon Emperor. Although Seraphol was upset to hear about her sister getting beat up, it didn't appear that this kid was much of a threat beyond being the average hooligan. Well, average hooligan with arguably one of the strongest sacred gears out there. They had to bring this kid to their side before someone else found him. While Seraphol would be busy talking to Zex about the situation, Seraphol wanted to see if her baby sister could recruit Issei. Get him on their side. It would be bad if the fallen angels got wind of this, or if Rias, her rival, pretty much stole her opportunity at getting someone extremely valuable added to her peerage. Sona was hesitant considering how unruly Issei was, but she figured it would be good to give it a chance at least. He seemed to be power hungry. She could work with that. Sure. It pretty much took everything out of Sona to end up approaching the brown-haired boy the next day. Her legs buckled up while in the process of approaching him, since she was afraid of having a repeat of yesterday. She reintroduced herself as Sona Citri and that she was the student body president. Issei raised a curious eyebrow, wondering what exactly she wanted. She asked politely if they could meet in private. Issei obliged this time around, and she began to explain her true nature. Issei didn't seem surprised at all. This confused Sona. Most would be awestruck hearing this, but Issei's face was completely devoid of emotion. Apparently he already knew all of this, which left Sona perplexed. Before she could ask how, Issei's sacred gear activated and a female voice came out of it. "Hi Sona! It's so nice to finally meet Seraphal's little sister. Although I wish we could have met sooner since, well, as you can clearly tell, I'm no longer in my original body. Now the boy you're talking to right now is my vessel."
"Our vessel, Maleen."
Yeah, whatever, bub," Milim replied. Issei began to sweat drop hearing the two bicker over such a trivial thing. Sona couldn't help but focus on the part where she heard the name Milim. That name was usually only mentioned in a fight to the death, never so casually. There was no way Issei was a tyrant of destruction's reincarnate. She pretty much refused to believe it. Sona pulled out several chessboard pieces, with most being pawn pieces. She offered Issei a role within her peerage, and even began to play to his interests. Issei was interested in fighting and dominating others in battle, right? He could do a lot more of that without having to worry about getting in trouble with the school faculty. She'd make sure they wouldn't stop his fights from now on if he joined the peerage. It was basically that working underneath her would give Issei less restrictions in the long run. The only real restriction he would have is listening to what Sona asked for him to do, and even then it would still probably revolve around fighting or recruiting someone, so nothing too out of his comfort zone. Issei thought about the proposal for a minute. He admitted that the faculty was pretty annoying. He was also suspended a good couple of times as well because of the fighting, so if Sona could really solve that issue, then he'd be happy to work under her. He supposed. The black-haired king of the Citri peerage smiled when she heard Issei accept the role. She sent the pieces into Issei, but for some reason they immediately pumped right back out. She was confused for a moment until they began to shift into mutation pieces. Her eyes widened. Was he really her reincarnation? This seemed to give even more evidence towards that fact. It was either that or he had some other strange form of bloodline within him that would cause so many pieces to mutate like that. Right after the shift, the pieces immediately went back to Issei, who commented on how it tickled him a bit. She sweat dreamt hearing that part. Okay. It didn't matter to her in the long run since she was able to recruit Issei into her peerage, and that was all that really mattered. For a good couple of weeks, nothing much really changed for Issei though. Besides reporting to the school council now, but more like a shadow king of sorts. He realized that this school faculty wasn't really putting any effort in trying to stop Issei for some reason now. He appreciated that. It really seemed that Sona was holding up to her part of the deal. When he went to check on Sona and the rest of her peerage one day while they were supposedly quite a bit, supposedly having a meeting, what he saw instead was reincarnated into a devil. He saw her from time to time around school and she went by the name Haruko. He never noticed anything special about her though. Did Sona see something in her that Issei couldn't? He doubted that, to be honest. Even when he scanned the girl, her levels were still pretty average at best despite being reincarnated. He lifted his arms and had them behind his head. He walked over and greeted everyone before turning to Sona and Haruko. So, I'm guessing you're a new recruit to Sona's peerage? He asked. Haruko nodded. Issei smirked. Cool. What's your special ability? Special ability? She seemed confused. You know, like sacred gears or magic? Do you have some form of hidden strength or speed that separates you from the others, or do you have some connection to a high-level being, whether it be some demon or other form of spiritual presence? Maybe. No, Issei. She doesn't have any of that. She just randomly walked into the meeting and heard what we were talking about. I couldn't just let her walk out with that sort of information though, so I figured, why not turn her into a subordinate? If she wasn't interested, I would simply wipe her memory of this event ever happening. Sona explained. Hey! Ruko squealed. Sona rubbed her head though, shushing her. Issei didn't really find Ruko to be all that interesting until he began seeing Ruko tag alongside him in his fights, usually when the odds seemed to be against him, far or more against him, you could say. He realized how sadistic this girl could be to her opponents. He supposed everyone started from somewhere, and this girl was shaping up to become one of his greatest allies while fighting. After all, who wouldn't want a sidekick who basically cracked skulls and broke the backs of all the rebellious students? Well, the rebellious students that went under their legion. With all of this commotion going on though, a certain redhead couldn't help but notice Issei's actions. She was confused as to how this was happening. After all, in Rias' mind, Issei was still only human. For some reason though, he was able to practically take over the school and turn it into some sort of headquarters for a bunch of gangsters. Not only that, but Issei managed to defeat Sona in a battle. She couldn't find a feasible way for that to be possible. She had to go into investigation stalking mode. She studied Issei's movements carefully. It started with his fighting skills, which seemed to be more like that of a brawler than anything. His physical strength was off the charts though, and for some reason he also had a sidekick who was helping to spread his influence even faster. She was even more dangerous than Issei, since he at least showed some mercy toward his opponents. This girl, Ruko was her name, she believed, showed little compassion for her opponents until they admitted defeat and subjugation to the Issei Legion. How odd. Little did she know that Issei was well aware of an investigation stalking though. Even without his special abilities, Rias was, pretty terrible at hiding and disguising herself. It was almost painful to watch in all honesty. There were two things that were suggested for Issei to do in this case. The first was to straight up beat Rias into a pulp, or to go to Sona about it. Since Rias seemed to be close to Sona for some reason, Issei decided to go with the latter. That, and Issei realized that if he fought Rias, this would only make her even more focused on trying to study him. After Issei explained the whole situation to Sona, she simply sighed. She would cover it. Not too long afterwards, Issei realized Rias wasn't really stalking him anymore. He sighed in relief. It was getting annoying after all. If anything, he would have to confront Rias directly if Sona didn't do anything to stop her friend. The next recruit into Sona's peerage was a boy by the name of Saji. He was also a delinquent, but his last saving grace was trying to help a child get out of their own before they would get hit by a car. Saji ended up taking their place though. Sona saw this and decided to give him a second chance at life, although it would be as her servant. When Saji was introduced, he, Issei, and Ruko immediately headed off. It was an instant spike between delinquents, and a new group was formed. The menaces to society, the Black Air Force energy of Cool Academy. This was a term used for the trio made up of Issei, Saji, and Raruko. A year had passed since then. With this group, they had essentially taken over the school, although the students still listened to whatever Sona told them to do. They also were incredibly subservient to Issei's small group. They were a more rowdy bunch now. The once respected school was turned into a shell of its former self. It was ruled by an iron fist, or, well, 3 or 4 in this case. Fear dictated how the students would act. If anyone stepped out of line, they already knew they would be going home with a bloody nose if they were lucky. That was for the regulars at the school. Those who could prove their worth and show that they were the cream of the crop would have more freedom in how they acted. They would usually participate in fights in order to keep or gain new positions. Not only that, but they wouldn't have to worry about having to fight anyone from Issei's trio. No one wanted to fight Issei, especially when they saw that Issei was seemingly in cahoots with Sona as well. That's what really made them fear her as well. Whatever she did to have Issei actually partially behave around her had to be crazy. Even crazier than Issei, that was. A new girl joined the school though. She had to quickly adapt and prove her worth though. She went by the name Yuma, and on her first day she judo limped one of Issei's hooligan subordinates. This caused the whole school to go into disarray seeing this. It didn't make much sense to them. How strong was this girl? This caught the attention of Issei as well, who wanted to know more about her. This Yuma girl, she seemed different from the others. She explained how she just needed help finding some of her classes, and the creep decided to make his move on her, so she decided to act accordingly. Issei understood what she meant and decided to walk her to her classes personally. While directing her to her classes, the two talked and they eventually began to grow a bit of a bond. By the end of the day, Yuma asked Issei on a date. The school freaked out even more when Issei accepted the offer. It was almost as if everyone's expectations for their leader were crumbling right before their eyes. Issei paid them no mind though. Issei wore a leather jacket, reddish pink shirt, and a pair of jeans to their date. Yuma wore a pretty purple dress as they went to a festival, arcade, and a fast food restaurant too. To end off their date, Issei and Yuma walked around in the park. The girl turned to Issei though and decided to ask him a question. There was a strange silence though when she asked and revealed her true nature. I am not gonna yell this part, I cannot. Drago Buster, Issei yelled. That night, people would comment on the fact they saw a meteor shower near the park that night. Someone also apparently vandalized the park to oblivion too. No one would ever know what really happened that night though. No one was close enough to witness Issei produce an attack that turned the fallen angel into fireworks. There was not even a trace of the girl left. Good job, Reincarnate, Maleen cheered within Issei's head. And yeah, my throat is basically dead now. It is your boy Kintai next signing out. You guys already know the deal. Like, share, comment, subscribe, yeah. You know all that jazz. Peace.